Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and live a more vibrant second half. If you are on YouTube today, please don't forget to ring that bell so you don't miss any more of these amazing conversations. And if you're on a podcast platform, please remember to subscribe, rate, and share this conversation. We're going to be having a very timely conversation today about gut health. My guest today is going to help us understand how the gut plays a huge role in our mood and brain health, and how the current commonplace issues many people are having are connected to the gut. My guest is Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary. She's a neurologist and an Ayurvedic practitioner. Dr. Kulreet, thank you so much for being with me today.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I had such a hard time while we were fixing my technological issues, not starting the conversation, as you know. We had like 3 starts. I was like, and this and that. Wait, we're not recording. So I would love to kick it off with what it is that makes you passionate about this. How did you get onto this idea of gut health?
Well, what isn't exactly a voluntary journey? I think just like for so many physicians who, we're pretty happy being in our little boxes and feeling like we know everything after all of those many, many, many long years of our medical training. I got unwillingly, to some extent, pulled onto this path because I became a patient. I developed intractable migraine headaches. And every time I share that story, I always tell people, that God's got a sense of humor, because here I was as a well-trained, respectable neurologist, and I couldn't fix my own migraine headaches. And that gives you a certain degree of humility to rethink your paradigms, rethink the medical paradigms that you've been taught. And for me, it wasn't throwing everything out, but realizing that there's more, there's something that I haven't learned yet. And so I became a patient and actually worked with an Ayurvedic practitioner. And the first thing he told me was that my migraines were coming from poor gut health. And I was not only shocked, I was kind of annoyed. I was kind of just annoyed because I was like, no, it's not, kind of that rebellious teenager, just like, no, it's not. I know everything. No, it's not. But this was after a year of trying to fix it myself. And so I followed his recommendations, which was predominantly a gut program. And in 3 months, I was headache free, not, having to take anything for headaches because I wasn't having them. I lost 10 pounds that I didn't even know I had gained. My energy and creativity were, the same that they were really before I started my medical training. And it forced me to have to embrace this new yet ancient way of thinking, which is understanding that there's a connection between the brain and the gut. And the gut is the most important part of our overall health.
It's interesting. You're not the first doctor that I've had this conversation with, and that's fascinating. But I do wonder, and this is a side thought, a lot of doctors and nurses have a very demanding and grueling schedule. And it's often true that they have difficulty being able to sit and enjoy a meal throughout their workday.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know how we eat, it's not just what we eat, but how we eat also impacts our gut health. Am I right about that?
No, you nailed it. And, up until that point, I wasn't even stopping for lunch. Lunch was a time for me to get caught up, squeeze in maybe an emergency patient that needed my attention. My entire focus was really on taking care of other people and not taking care of myself. And you're absolutely right. It's equally as important how we eat as it is what we eat. And when I realized this, this wasn't something that I wanted to just teach my patients because, I learned it, from my Ayurvedic practitioner and then got my training in Ayurvedic medicine. I wanted to embody it. I wanted to really embody this lifestyle approach to your health. And that took time. But the first thing I had to do was really look at the way I was feeding myself. And it was embarrassing. It was really embarrassing that as like a grown woman and as a physician, how poorly I ate. And I think if you compared me to most people, I was not eating poorly. I was eating very much like most Americans. And I didn't even think my diet was that bad. It wasn't until I got the headaches that I had to take a really hard look at what am I putting into myself and how am I eating?
Mm, mm. I'd like to talk a little bit about food because I was sharing with you before we hit record about my daughter who has um she has gluten sensitivity is what we've figured out. She's very disciplined with the way she eats and we've found a way for her to live and eat in the way I cook, if you will. We've kind of changed as a family
Sure.
away from a lot of gluten just because it's easier. I mean, she's an adult, but if we're all going to eat together, I'm not going to cook 2 meals, right? I'm going to just kind of
Absolutely.
eliminate. And it's not like we never have it, but we generally have this kind of like, she's like a visual like, uh-oh, did that upset your gut? And I understand that it's from the gut. So let's talk a little bit about the common foods or the commonplace things that we eat or how we eat that are contributing. Or does the gut biome itself, are we born with a perfect gut biome and then we spend our life destroying it? Like, how does that work?
Oh boy, it's a really good question. It's a big question. Let's break it down. So first of all, are we born with a perfect gut biome? Well, we used to be. I really do believe that we used to be. What we're finding now is that from the moment that we're born, so when we actually sample the cord blood, so this is like mom and baby are still connected, right? And then they clip the cord, and right at that moment, they're sampling the cord blood. So this is the blood that's flowing through the baby.
Mm.
What we're finding is that there's hundreds of different chemicals present already in the cord blood. And, it's always amazed me because there's so many environmental toxins. And when I'm talking about environmental toxins, I'm not just talking about the stuff that they're spraying all over our food, but even the things that they're putting on our clothes, things that are getting placed on our furniture, on our dishes. So many of these are disruptive to women in particular, and our bodies will absorb it. We'll absorb it into our fat cells. We'll absorb it into our reproductive system. Why would you do anything to harm a woman's body when we're the ones that make babies? Like, if it's in us, it's basically now in all of humanity. Like once we have it, once we have something, everybody will be born with it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what's happening. All of these environmental toxins, and all of the stuff that is getting put in our food that shouldn't be there, it's accumulating in women's bodies, which means from day one, it's virtually impossible to have a healthy gut. It's not that we didn't or we can't. It's just we've built an environment. We have altered like our food sources, and we have altered the experience on earth to such an extent that even babies can't be born without having environmental toxins pumping through them. And of course that impacts your gut microbiome. So it's no fault of like the human body. Of course we're made, to start off like life like that. But we've created a situation where it's just impossible. And you're seeing that because you're seeing all of these food allergies that we never saw from a couple of generations ago. And it's not like something has genetically happened to us. It's just we are now products of, a toxic environment. And so that is going to be reflected in the type of gut we have. And since the gut is so important for overall health, it's going to lead to increased diseases across the board. And of course, that's exactly what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Now, from what I understand about the gut biome, the gut is the second brain. Am I right?
I wouldn't even call it the second brain. The way that it is described in Ayurvedic medicine is that these two aspects of our body are so intertwined that you really can't even dissect out once something is happening here, when it's going to happen here. It's happening simultaneously. And so let
Okay.
me just kind of give an example of that. So it's a bidirectional communication, although I was really surprised as I did my research into this that our gut is actually talking to our brain more than our brain talks to our gut. That was a hard one for me to swallow as a neurologist. But what that means, though, is that the second that you have a thought, it is having some kind of an impact in your gut. And I think all of us are aware of it when we have a really strong thought or we have a really strong emotion.
Yes.
Well, like this morning when, we were trying to get the computer to work. And so that worry or that anxiety, that's going to take root, right, in your gut. Like if we looked at your gut before and after, just even that like whole process of trying to get the computer up and running, we would have noticed a change. And so the second we start to think something, there is something that is happening in response to those set of thoughts in the gut. Now, if those aren't chronic thoughts, your body will reverse itself and go back, to a healthier microbiome. But if those are chronic thoughts, if it's not just, because of this particular instance, but let's say that there's chronic anxiety all of the time, your gut microbiome will reflect that state of chronic anxiety. Now, the reverse is also true. And this is the part that I have found the most fascinating, because to me, this is like the low-lying fruit. These are the easiest things. And most women don't realize how easy it is to shift the way that they're feeling through their gut. The type of bacteria you have in your gut will determine the types of thoughts you're having, will determine your mood, because that is where many of our neurotransmitters are made. And the neurotransmitters are the way in which one brain cell talks to another. And so my training was, neurotransmission happens up here. And then when I went out and became a migraine sufferer and then, became a patient of Ayurvedic medicine, when I started doing the research, I was like, wait a minute. Actually, the majority of our neurotransmitters, some of the most important ones for mood, are coming from our gut microbiome. They're producing it, which means they are having a huge impact on the way we feel and the way we think, which is why I start first with shifting that microbiome. And then spontaneously, people start eating differently. They start thinking differently. One of the best parts of shifting the gut microbiome is the new life that awaits you when you have a different population of bacteria. It's hard to believe at first, but it helps you to understand kind of the wholeness of human experience, that every part of us matters.
It's really a powerful concept. And I think it's an empowering concept.
Yes.
Because it means that we're not victims.
Yes.
And the power of thought is something that I, as a coach, understand. And a little side note from that. So my mom was married to an abusive man, so I experienced trauma in my formative years. And so well into my 40s, I would get randomly triggered. Like I didn't necessarily know it was coming. And when it did, it was always in my gut. That was like the trigger point. But it felt like I'd been sucker punched.
Yes.
And that's how I learned. And I don't know if this can figure in, but there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, it's a book I give every single one of my patients to read when we start working together.
Oh my gosh. And I knew that instinctively, having had to become a student because of suffering, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because it was like to your point, that communication, right?
Yeah.
It's like my gut knew it was coming. And then my brain would go, oh no.
Yes.
So it went belly up for me.
And the feedback loop is so fast that
it
goes like belly up and then up to the brain, then back down. And so that's one of the first books that I recommend to my patients who are struggling with the concept that trauma is embodied. And, in Ayurvedic medicine, they talk about this. This is what I love about Ayurveda. They go so deeply into that which is undigested, whether it is food, whether it's a physical experience, whether it's an emotional experience, whether it's a mental experience, a sensory experience. Whatever is undigested will sit in your body and in your mind. And so almost all of my patients will do some type of trauma work, depending on what it is.
Yeah.
If it's very significant, like what you described, I will incorporate, EMDR therapy. I'll refer them for EMDR therapy or lifespan integration, which is also extremely, extremely powerful. Incorporate those types of therapies while we are also working on the brain gut axis. And I had a patient who had Giardia, recurrent Giardia, just could not get rid of it, had gone to Asia, came back with Giardia for 20 years, and basically just assumed she had a gut issue. And I said, you're young, you're healthy, you have no other medical issues. This should have gone away. Your body has a way of fighting this. And I said, there is some kind of trauma in the mind that is preventing this from healing. And, the first few sessions, like, no, there's nothing. And as we went deeper, of course, we found out that there was a repressed trauma around sexual abuse. And she still was very certain that had nothing to do with why she had chronic Giardia. I said, just stick with me here. This is not my first rodeo. I've done this with a lot of people. Please just trust that this may be linked. And she very reluctantly finally went and started doing the EMDR. And within a few months of doing the EMDR, and of course we were doing the gut stuff, and we were doing the support for the mind. I had her on specific herbs to help to support the release of trauma from the mind and strengthening the gut. But it was when she finally released that trauma that all of a sudden she didn't have gut issues. And when we retested her, she no longer had Giardia.
Wow.
And I see that scenario happens over and over and over. So I actually start the conversation around trauma to demystify it. Almost everybody has trauma, just because we don't live in a very enlightened time. We don't have an understanding of how the gut-brain axis works, but we also don't have an understanding of the needs of children. And, there's no one to blame. It's just getting passed on from one generation to the next. Although I do think there's some things that are improving as more people are realizing the importance of mental health on overall health. But that is one of the first things that I talk about is we're going to look at all of these different aspects. We're going to do it sequentially, because I won't have my patients go into trauma work until I strengthen their gut and I've got their mind supported so that they can really dive in without it causing like just a complete shutdown.
Yeah. Yeah. I did it mostly alone, if you will. But the freedom that comes when you get through to the other side.
Oh, it's huge.
And what's interesting is, I think, isn't there something too, because, as a parent to a child, we are connected by this umbilical cord. So the emotional trauma that our parent is going through. So like when my mother was pregnant, she was 18, unmarried in the 60s. My biological father was a married man. So there was trauma. I was basically brought forth from a traumatic situation. And I wonder sometimes if that doesn't offset health from the beginning.
Absolutely. No, we know that now. We know that the intrauterine experience, the experience within your mom's belly and your mom's womb, that will impact your health. Now, this doesn't mean that it's set in stone. I want to make this really clear. These are all things that contribute to your health. They don't set it in stone. It just means that, it may not be your fault, all of the things that happened, but it's still your responsibility.
Yeah.
I really focus on that point that this may not be your fault. Like just even with the toxic environment that we're all immersed in, I didn't choose that. Nobody came to me and said, hey, listen, do we have your permission to put this in your food, even though it's going to disrupt your entire hormonal system? I didn't choose that, but it's still my responsibility to do something for my body to heal from it. And it's not just what happens intrauterine. What we're finding is that you can say there's an energetic umbilical cord to your parents for life, meaning, you are picking up their patterns. And usually you pick up the majority of them by the time you're 13, you've cemented most of them. And you spend the rest of your life in those patterns. Those patterns have a biochemical imprint. And that imprint is essentially expressed through the brain gut axis. This is why I say it's so important. If you want to know what you picked up from your parents and what programs you're living, look at your brain, look at your gut. It's going to tell you everything. And that's essentially what I do now. As an Ayurvedic neurologist, I look at what was the blueprint of your early childhood experience by examining people's brain health and their gut health, and then working to resolve that through the use of biochemistry, through the use of herbs. And then just as you unwind that, your behaviors start to change because your patterns start to change.
Mm-hmm.
The way you eat starts to change. It's all very integrated. You can't say, well, am I making it, a conscious decision? Is my unconscious, pushing it? Or is it my gut microbiome? The answer to all of that is yes. That is your entire, your CEO for your body is the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, and the gut microbiome. That is how we make decisions about how we're going to live.
So then would it mean that someone could be super disciplined in the way that they eat and live, but if they have not dealt with the underlying issues, they could still, in fact, have a state of unhealth, even if all of the external things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so my practice has evolved. I'm so glad you brought that particular scenario up. My practice has evolved in that initially I was seeing mostly neurological patients or people who were very, very, very unwell. And then it evolved to people who were doing all the right things and were still unwell. And like, but I'm doing everything. And in Ayurveda, the physical body is just 20% of who you are. That's just 20% of your makeup. So if you're doing everything right for your physical body, extremely disciplined, farmer's market, everything is in season, organic, and even that to a certain extent you can't control, because when we talk about environmental toxins, they're ubiquitous. You can't get away from them, but you can certainly minimize them. Even with that approach, there's other levels of your being that still need to be addressed. And the mental aspects are so important. And that's why I said doing trauma work, incorporating things like meditation, to me, you're not, I can't be practicing medicine if I'm not including that in the conversation. So it's doing everything on the physical side of what do we need to do physically to get your brain gut axis healthier. Okay, so we do that. And then what do we need to do mentally and emotionally to release, the past so that you can actually come into the present moment, which people think that's impossible. It's actually a lot easier than you think because the brain knows how to rewire. The brain has this capacity to erase old programs and learn new programs. It's a beautiful, beautiful organ. And then the other big part of it is connecting to your spiritual self. And people oftentimes don't understand what that means because they tend to associate that with a religious experience. And I said, there's a part of you that is just simply wiser and has never been influenced by your programs. You want to connect to that part of you. You want that deeply wise, ageless, timeless part of you to have a say in the way that you live. And that's really the purpose of meditation. And for some people, maybe it's expressed through religion and other kind of, traditions. And for some people, it doesn't. It's just a knowingness.
It's so powerful because mindset specifically, as we're talking about, this strive and figuring out and struggle, right? And you're talking about that pausing and listening and just kind of, turning off the noise is what I'm hearing you say.
You nailed it. I think in the beginning of this journey, there has to be some striving, right? Because you're trying to overcome the inertia of not feeling good. And so there's this striving. And oftentimes the people I see, they've been striving for a while and it hasn't been working. And so they think the solution is striving even harder.
Right.
And
which is a mindset in the world right now, isn't it?
It is. And it's a very masculine mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a very feminine mindset. And in Ayurveda, you need to have equal amounts of feminine and masculine energy, or I shouldn't say equal, balanced amounts, because that's different for each person, what that balance looks like. And that's independent if you're male or female. And so if you are in constantly that striving masculine way, well, it's the feminine energy that actually allows for the healing. And so when I start working with people, we still are, it's not that we don't want them to strive at all, because if they did absolutely nothing, it wouldn't work. But, I'm giving them small steps at a time, right? And so they're striving to implement that. But then a lot of it is learning how to do the opposite, learning how to receive, how to become more feminine, how to become safe enough and to become still enough for the healing to begin to happen, how to tap more into that emotional body, tap into that emotional intelligence, those pent up memories, how to tap into that. And you can only do that when you are still, when you are calm. Sometimes I meditate every day, but sometimes like the day will just be so hectic, right? And I will not necessarily know that something has happened that was triggering or upsetting until the next day during my meditation. And then I'll have that moment of calm. And then all of a sudden I'll have all of this discomfort come up and I go, oh, that was actually very upsetting. That's why I was kind of holding myself so tight. That's why my stomach was kind of off. And you need those moments of calm and stillness in order to actually tune in to what's going on.
I've known people that are afraid of that calm and stillness. They're afraid of the emotion that they know is there, because the fear is I'm going to start to trigger or fall down that emotional hill, if you will, and there will never be an end to it.
And that's a very, very common misconception. I think it's just a way that our egos hold us imprisoned, because the reality is any emotion that is stuck, it's already torturing you. You wake up tortured. It's already telling you you're not safe from the moment that you wake up. It's already doing the worst. And most people forget that they've already survived whatever it is that they're running from. You've already survived it. It actually doesn't still exist outside. It only exists internally. And when you start to release them, just as you said, the amount of freedom and the amount of energy released, that energy then gets translated into more energy for the body to heal, more energy for the mind to be creative, right? Deeper sleep, more physical energy to be able to exercise, go for walks, enjoy your time with family. It only gives you energy, but that's a very, very common kind of egoic program that if I go down this path, I'll never come up. And it's the exact opposite. You're already in a cage, and it's literally being afraid to leave your own prison. And the way I work with my patients on that is again, I fight biochemistry with biochemistry. So I first just start them on a program that gets the gut and the brain communicating better. And then they're able to see the fear more clearly and realize that, hold on, that fear isn't me. I can actually see it. It's no longer me. And now, of course, they've got a healthier gut microbiome that's giving them more serotonin, that's boosting their mood. And so then they start feeling, more courageous, like, hey, I can actually do this.
Because it feels like when you're in trauma or you're triggered, that things in your body are literally doing this.
They are doing that.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, they are doing that. And when you're doing this, you're not receiving the natural energy for healing. When you're constricted, I mean, just when you think of even your body, like when the blood vessels get constricted, that's when your blood pressure goes up. That's when the nutrients aren't flowing. That's how tissue become ischemic, meaning it's not getting the oxygen and the nutrients that it needs. It's that constriction, right? When you're doing that, you're literally cutting yourself off from your own healing. And from what I'm seeing with my patients is the majority of people are living like that. And it's unfortunate. And we're not doing a good job of emphasizing the importance of emotional expression, and we're really not doing a good job of emphasizing the connection between the body, the mind, the emotions, and this other part, which again, I call your spiritual self, just this other part it's you. It's you. It's like one of the best versions of you. And when we don't have a holistic approach that helps people to tap into each one of these parts, you have chronic disease. You have basically the healthcare system that most of us are really struggling with.
You know, I'm 100% on board with we are mind, body, spirit. And we know this if we pay attention, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like it's how we're designed. But I think it's interesting that we live in this culture where there's so much, what's the word? There's so much competition right now in the world, the way it's designed, right? You've got your social media. I know everybody bangs on social media and it can have some good qualities, but I really feel we've got a lot of other kinds of addictions going on.
Yes.
Things that are keeping our minds distracted, things that are helping us avoid, things that are actually putting us in emotional states that aren't always healthy for us. It's not even just anymore like 100 years ago, something you read in a newspaper and maybe the person next door to you that's irritating you. Like our world is literally global all the time. And how are you seeing that kind of global? I mean, there's so many fingers to it. How are you seeing that impact?
Well, I mean, how do I put this? We've always been global. It's not that.
Sure.
When we talk about the spiritual connection, the spiritual aspect of ourself is essentially, I love the way quantum physicists, reference this, because they're referencing it from such a scientific standpoint. And so there's just such a honesty to it that there's just this web of energy. And that web of energy is all of us collectively. Now, what you're describing, though, is numbing. Now, because there's two ways of experiencing this web of energy. You can experience this web of energy of, oh my gosh, like I'm connected to everything, not just every person, but literally to everything. All of life is ultimately just energy. How amazing. What can we do collectively together? When there is something blocking us from connecting to that web of energy, which is us, that is when we do the numbing behavior. That is when you could take anything. You could take anything like social media. You could take it into something that connects and uplifts or something that disconnects and disempowers. You can take any technology and just based on how connected you are to who you really are, it'll be something either positive or something negative. And so we've got to look at, well, why are we numbing? And what I have found, again, it is the collective trauma. It's the collective shame messages. It's the, I'm not good enough. I'm unwanted. I'm unlovable. All of this stuff that has turned us into what we're seeing, out there. And what I love, though, is the solution to it is not really that complicated or difficult, because we do have this amazing apparatus that we call the body. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And what I see is in the course of 1 to 2 years with my patients, they really do reverse that state of disconnection and that numbing behavior. And suddenly they are coming up with these brilliant ideas. And most of those brilliant ideas involves working with other people. It's around partnership, that's how we actually become uplifted. It's not competitive. It's about partnership. And when you tap into that, you're tapping into a web of energy that has a degree of intelligence that is so much far beyond than just what our intellect, our individualized intellect can ever think of. I experience this on a regular basis. I'll either be like on a walk or in the shower, like I'm doing something where I'm not really having to think, and just these great ideas start to flow. And what I love watching is how those great ideas actually come to be, that I'm both participating, but there's something bigger also participating. And I'll start seeing some synchronicity. Things are starting to pop up and I go, wow, this is amazing. I would have never come up with this on my own. We can also go through life like that. And again, it doesn't take very much time. It's 1 to 2 years of really putting that masculine effort in with an equal amount of that feminine receiving, nurturing stillness. It's that combination of both of those energies that creates that calm and that stillness for, what people consider to be miraculous to happen. I don't consider it a miracle. I consider that just our natural state when we enter into a place of balance.
That's incredible. So when we talk about, let's jump back to the gut, the mind-body connection. Maybe we could dig a little deeper on what you mean by that. I know we've talked about it lightly, but let's go ahead and focus a little bit on the mind-body connection.
Sure. So when I work with my patients, there's a certain set of interventions that I have them do immediately, and it'll kind of exemplify what this connection looks like and why it's so important to keep it in mind. And the reason why I use this program pretty much for everyone now is because we're all facing the same modern day narrative. We're all kind of in the same sinking boat. And so the life rafts and the things that we need to get out of the sinking boat look the same. So acknowledging the gut brain connection means acknowledging that you've got to address both to get out of whatever situation you are in. And so I'll start people on an Ayurvedic herb called triphala. It's made out of 3 berries. I actually grew up eating one of these berries as a pickle on our kitchen table. So it's 3 berries. I'll have them start to take triphala anywhere between 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams at bedtime. Now that starts to move out some of the toxins that have been accumulating in the gut. Okay. That starts to help to build a healthier gut mucosa. This is creating a better home for those bacteria to thrive. In addition to that, I'll have them make a tea. I call it the prime tea. It's just 3 seeds. Your daughter should try this, actually. She should give this a try. It's half a teaspoon of cumin seeds, coriander seeds, and fennel seeds.
Okay.
You boil it in 4 to 5 cups of water for about 5 to 10 minutes. Strain out the seeds and just sip that all throughout the day. Okay. So in these first 2 steps, which I give pretty much every one of my patients, we're starting to address the gut. Now, just from doing that, they'll notice, hey, some of the angst that I wake up with is going down. Like I'm having more moments of clarity and calm. But we haven't addressed now the mind part yet, right?
Right.
So the 2 herbs I like to start with are ashwagandha and brahmi. And most people have heard about ashwagandha. It helps to lower the stress response. And that's really important to help to reduce binge eating. It helps to reduce the cravings. Again, just using biochemistry to fight biochemistry. Now, brahmi is an herb that many people don't know about, and it's traditionally used in Ayurvedic medicine for a lot of neurological conditions and psychological conditions. One of the reasons I really like using it is it helps to break food addictions. So most people don't realize that food is actually being engineered to be addictive these days. So all of the junk food out there, there's a food science where they try to hit the pleasure point. So they have measured this is the point where your brain becomes as addicted to food as somebody would become to cocaine. And we've actually looked at studies that show this happens. So the brahmi starts to interfere with that addiction cycle. So now we're addressing the brain part through the ashwagandha, reducing the stress response, and brahmi by breaking out the addiction response. Okay, now we have addressed both gut and brain. Just by doing that, people are able to begin to change the way they eat. Now, even without me saying anything, they will start noticing, hey, I ate those nachos last night. I wasn't feeling good. It's like you've cleared out the junk enough for people to start seeing more clearly. That is when I start having them actually change their eating habits consciously, because I have their unconscious mind and their gut on my side. And once we start working on an Ayurvedic diet, and in Ayurveda, you eat specifically to your body type. So it's not the same recommendation. It's very much according to your unique makeup, which is called your dosha. Then we'll start adding these recommendations. And then people are like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm just feeling better, because their gut brain is online. And then finally, this is when we start to go into, okay, now let's start working on, is there any unresolved trauma? Are there any emotional patterns? And by the way, the answer to this is always yes. Are there any emotional patterns that are are getting stuck in the body. Okay. So I'll introduce them to meditation, and then we'll start doing the trauma work at this point. Now, once you do that whole lineup, what you have in the course, again, depending on how quickly people want to move, I never push, but in the course of 1 to 2 years, you have a new human being in 1 to 2 years. And I'm talking about people who have lived with unknown trauma for 60, 65, 70 years, or have lived with chronic gut issues or mood disorders for decades. In 1 to 2 years, you have a new human being. That is how amazing these bodies are. And we just don't have the manual. We don't have the manual. And that's what I got out of Ayurveda, is it was just the manual to figure out how to steer this vehicle, rather than just driving off a cliff because we didn't know how this car worked.
Or we make assumptions. I think a lot of people, it's like in my family, right?
Yes.
That whole
And
kind of diatribe, what do you call it? It's a dialogue around, I have to be this way because everyone in my family is this way.
I have so many of my patients who think that they are genetically predisposed, and especially a lot of the women, unfortunately, who think that they're genetically predisposed to certain things, especially certain mood disorders. Actually, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine because they found that women have much higher risks for depression and anxiety and other mood disorders. And she said, oh, it must be genetics. And I was like, no, our behaviors are also inherited. It's not that we're bound to have certain conditions. We may be bound to certain struggles. Like I said, it may not be your fault because you're starting in uterine, in utero, you are starting to get certain programs, both biochemical and psychological from the beginning. But it doesn't mean that those can't be changed. If those couldn't be changed, then what would be the point of life? The point of life is it's a freaking miracle. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing the stuff that we go through, and yet we can still overcome it. And I think as this message starts to grow more and more globally, as we start to realize how much we can change our internal ecology, we will start to look at the world and be like, hold on, if we can change this from the inside within us, like, we can also change the trends that we're seeing in the world. When you feel empowered to change your own physical and psychological destiny, that empowerment automatically gets turned onto the world.
It's an incredible thing because it takes a little bit of faith, a lot of grace and patience, because I think we are to some degree inclined to a quick fix. And what you're prescribing is more of a journey, but the results are more profound.
Yes, but you say this because, to me, I think if you could change everything that you know about your life in 1 to 2 years, to me, that's like the freaking quickest fix on the planet. Like, wow.
But it's permanent, but the journey to get to the permanent.
Absolutely. But you're right. In terms of how many people will say, well, what's the one pill that will change it? I'm like, it doesn't exist. And why would you want it to be that? Like, you would miss out on the whole transformative process. And even when I introduced the Ayurvedic herbs, I introduced the Ayurvedic herbs very, very early on because I know that people are in a biochemical cage. And I always say you have to fight biochemistry with biochemistry. And so those initial herbs and that tea, which really is just food, some of the things that I call herbs are really just foods. But that initial steps to just get people out of that biochemical cage, it allows you to actually start the journey. That's just the beginning step so that you're not locked down. Now, once you get out, that's actually where the journey begins. We'll continue the herbs to support that environment, but then it's like, okay, what do you want to learn about yourself? Who do you want to become? And I got to tell you, I cannot believe how scary it is for many people initially to realize that they have the power and they have the control over deciding who they can become. That is terrifying. And we got to just simply go through that phase of like, wait, hold on. You mean I have a say? And I'm like, yeah, you actually have ultimate say.
Yeah, there's a vision to it, You have to lift your chin up. You have to lift your eyes up and think beyond, right? What
That's a
we've
beauty,
thought we've known.
though.
I
That's a
agree.
beauty. That's like, that was the whole point of being human. Sometimes when I see how people are living, I'm like, you forgot. And I forgot too. I'm not saying like this isn't a journey I didn't go through. It's a journey I'm still going through.
Sure.
But like, we forgot why we came. We forgot that this was supposed to be joyful, not that it was supposed to be easier without challenges, but that the challenges would bring something to us, both individually and as a global community. That we came for our individual journey. We also came to journey with the human race.
And there's so much richness to that tapestry if we're willing to submit ourselves to that truth. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
To submit ourselves to that truth. I really like that. It's a beautiful statement.
Thank you. So if you had to kind of tap into 3 things that you think or that would be helpful to my listeners today, because your particular topic is definitely not accomplishable in 45 minutes. But it's intriguing and powerful. And I'm trusting that people are going to be like, whew, So what are like 3 things that you can help them anchor in to kind of get them started on this journey to true health and wholeness and connectedness?
I think the first one is to really drop the shame. Like, no matter what you are experiencing, you're not the only one. You really are not. There's nothing you have done, or there is nothing that has been done to you that has taken away your value and worth as a human being. And so to just look at the shame and realize that that also is just a program, and the brain, it can be reprogrammed to do just about anything. So it's just a program. And then I would say the first 2 kind of simplest and most life-altering steps are the ones that I mentioned. Take Trifla, because it'll just start clearing out the gut. And once you start clearing out the gut, things just change. Your whole view of life starts to really radically change. And then make the prime tea, the cumin, coriander, and fennel tea. And for the same reason, that until you get out of the biochemical cage, you just won't believe it's possible, because it feels very real, and it feels real because it is real. Once you start breaking the biochemistry that is binding you to inertia, then, you've got a whole new playing field of opportunities.
Powerful. I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing that. How can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
I have a web page that gives people an introduction to Ayurveda, and that's on drkchaudhary.com. And that's a great place to connect to a lot of the articles that I've written on Ayurveda. And then I also have my personal website, drkulreetchaudhary.com, and that helps to keep people up to date with the work that I'm doing. And if somebody wants a guided process to some of the steps that I talked about, it's in my book, The Prime, which is actually a neurorehabilitation program that got turned into a weight loss program. Because when you do all the steps to repair the gut-brain axis, you will lose weight. But that's a great way to start this journey on your own, but still through a guided process.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Kulreet, I am so grateful for our conversation today. I love the way that you communicate it so clear and understandable. I can sense that you're very passionate about helping people be truly healthy and whole and getting them back on the journey that they were ultimately designed to be on, becoming who they're designed to be. And I am so grateful for people like you that have taken the journey to the point earlier, submitted themselves to something different outside of their knowledge, because that has brought you here to help so many people be healthy and whole again in a way that we only dream of. And I'm so grateful for what you've done, who you are, and what you continue to do.
Thank you so much. That was very sweetly said, and your kindness was received right into the heart.
Fantastic. Well, friends, today, if you find yourself on YouTube, look down below. All the links that she shared, I will have down there. So in case you didn't know how to spell her name, no problem. I got you. If you're on a podcast platform, please head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 331, and all the links will be there as well. So it'll be easy to find her. Friends, today, if you are getting this conversation in your ears, please know that it's not an accident. If you have been struggling with something in your life, whether it's your health, your mindset, your relationships, just the way that you feel in the world, this is the hopeful message that there are things you can do and have the power to take control of your life and these things and put yourself on a path toward wholeness and health in a way that is sustainable. Dr. Kulreet has shared just a handful of things today that can get you started. And I encourage you to tap into these resources, check out her website, read her book, and put yourself on a path. Unlock that prison that she was talking about and give yourself freedom in mind, body, and spirit today. Friends, if you really connected to this conversation, please take the time to share this, because this literally could change the world. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I look forward to sharing more inspirational people, conversations, and strategies in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.